April 1945. Germany was on the verge of collapse. And Berlin, 50 miles away, was waiting. George S. Patton leaned over the map and pressed his finger on a thin line running through the distance. Berlin, 50 miles. The air smelled of gunpowder and burnt motor oil. Outside, the polished steel of tanks gleamed in the cold spring sun. The Third Army had covered 300 miles in 3 weeks. No armored force in history had advanced this quickly, and now the road was open. German resistance was collapsing. The units facing them were no longer seasoned soldiers. They were old men and boys who had barely grown their first whiskers. Patton knew this. The intelligence officer had been blunt when delivering the morning report. Less than 50 miles to Berlin, the probability of encountering meaningful resistance was nearly zero. He had worked for this moment. He had waited years for this scene. Now he was ready. But that morning, an order arrived. Not from the Germans. From his own headquarters. To understand this, you need to know who Patton was. George Smith Patton was a commander who viewed war as an art, who deeply believed that applying speed and violence simultaneously was something nothing else could compare to. He had routed Rommel's forces in North Africa. He had seized Sicily in a race against the British. He had swept through France like lightning after the Normandy landings. In every battle he had done the same thing. Keep advancing. Give the enemy no room to breathe. Speed makes the difference. And now, 50 miles away, stood the destination that had been the culmination of all these years. Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich, Hitler's last refuge. And he was the closest commander to taking this city. He had defined himself in the deserts of North Africa. He had danced across maps in France. But tonight, on German soil, standing at the very gates of victory, he felt something different inside him. Pain. Historical and pure pain. To understand what this meant, you need to look at the picture in April 1945. Germany was squeezed from two sides. From the west, American and British forces were advancing. From the east, the Soviets. Hitler had retreated to his bunker. The question was no longer whether the war would be won. The question was who would win it. More precisely, who would determine how the map of post-war Europe would be drawn. The answer to that question would come from the commanders of whichever army entered Berlin. In February 1945, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had come together at Yalta. The negotiations concerned the post-war period. Who would control what after Germany was defeated? Agreements were made. Some written, some verbal, some formal, some implied. Berlin and East Germany would be left within the Soviet sphere of influence. West Germany would remain under American, British, and French control. In return, the Soviets would enter the war against Japan. Patton knew about this agreement, and he was deeply convinced that this agreement was a historical mistake. Moreover, it is known that before this conversation, on April 12th, Patton had done some calculations at his own headquarters. He had called his intelligence officer. He had asked how many miles to Berlin. 50. The German strength? Scattered, not quality troops. The Soviets? East of the Oder. At least 7 days away. Patton had written notes that morning. Bradley hadn't arrived yet, but he sensed that he would come, and that something was going to end. General Omar Bradley came in person. He traveled a long way. And Patton had known for 10 years that Bradley was not someone who made unnecessary trips. The two had been educated at the same schools, stood side by side in the same wars. They were West Point graduates, men of the same generation. But this morning, the weight Bradley carried as he stepped out of his command vehicle was different. His steps were heavy, his face was tense. The message was clear. You cannot go to Berlin. Patton said not a single word. He simply took Bradley into the headquarters tent and closed the door. The staff stepped outside. 2 generals were left alone. 2 men who had fought together for years, who had witnessed each other's darkest decisions. Now they were speaking a different language from one another. Before getting to how this event unfolded, if you want to learn more untold stories from the Second World War, click the subscribe button and support us for free. Patton pointed to the map. 50 miles, he said. 48 hours. The Germans are falling apart. The Soviets are still east of the Oder River, a week's march away. They're regrouping. We have an opportunity. And once this opportunity closes, it won't open again. Brad, can't you see this? Bradley moved to the other side of the table. He stood upright. He was tired but resolute. Despite the dark circles under his eyes, his gaze was clear. The decision has been made, he said. Eisenhower has signed it. Berlin will be left to the Soviets. Patton's jaw tightened. Left to the Soviets. Are you the one saying this to me? There is a political agreement, Bradley answered. Roosevelt and Churchill reached a mutual understanding with Stalin. That was the consensus reached at Tehran and at Yalta. The Soviets bore the heaviest burden of this war on the Eastern Front. They gave tens of millions of soldiers. Berlin will be left to them. This matter is finished at this point. Patton was silent for a while. The silence inside the tent was so heavy that even the rumble of tank engines from outside could not seep in. A candle flickered at the corner of the table. Patton stared fixedly at the Berlin marker on the map for a long time. Then he slowly turned, and his voice had dropped, but there was steel inside it. "Do you know what we're doing?" he said. "We're winning this war, but we're losing the next 50 years. Bradley frowned. "What do you mean?" Patton came to the table. He leaned over the map and moved his finger first to the west, then to the east. "Look at Poland. Look at Czechoslovakia. Look at Hungary. Every place the Red Army sets foot is turning Soviet. Every city, every country, every people. Were they liberated? Yes. But liberated for whom? They were freed from their own dictators and thrown into the arms of another dictator. Brad, we're defeating Hitler and handing Europe over to another tyranny. If you can't see this, you're blind." Bradley crossed his arms. "The Soviets are our allies. Today. And tomorrow? We've had this argument before. And you were wrong every time. I'm telling you this, Stalin doesn't stop. Dictators don't stop. They grow stronger and advance across the map. They take root wherever they settle. If they take Berlin, we lose half of Germany. And once that border is established, it will take decades to tear it down." This time Bradley said nothing. The light inside the tent had changed. It was turning to afternoon. The sun filtered through the canvas, painting the two generals' faces a pale yellow. Patton's eyes were on the map, but Bradley understood that those eyes were looking at something else. Not a city, a future. A future not yet lived but felt as inevitable. "We have the atomic bomb," said Patton in a low voice. Bradley straightened. "That information is classified." "I know it's classified, but it will be ready in a few months. The Manhattan Project is delivering. We don't need the Soviets for Japan. We can finish the Pacific on our own." So the justification at the core of this agreement disappears. We were told, sacrifice Berlin for the Soviet contribution. But that contribution won't be needed. There is no longer any military reason not to take Berlin. Bradley stayed silent for a long time. The clock ticked inside the tent. Sounds came from outside. Soldiers were passing. Vehicles were on patrol. But the distance between those two men was now much wider. This was not merely a matter of command. It was a matter of historical vision, and which vision would prevail in this matter would determine what world the coming generations would live in. Then Bradley spoke. "The decision will not change." Patton's voice hardened. "Then let it go on the record. We will be ashamed of this mistake." Bradley stood up and walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. "George, I know you. The thought of not hearing this order is crossing your mind. Don't do it. I'll replace you, and my heart won't ache doing it." Patton gave no answer. Bradley left. Patton was left alone. In the middle of the tent, before the map, Berlin was at his fingertips. 48 hours. He had his tanks. He had his fuel. His men were ready. And he knew. Moving was impossible. Disobeying meant the end of a military career spanning decades. It meant a court-martial. But staying silent about something he believed in with all his heart felt like its own kind of betrayal. That day, he obeyed the order. He summoned his commanders. He spoke briefly. He said what he had to say, and it was done. The Third Army stopped. The officers were stunned. Patton had never stopped like this, but this time he stopped. 2 weeks later, the Red Army entered Berlin. The battle raged with tremendous ferocity. The city was engulfed in fire and rubble. The Soviets lost 80,000 soldiers taking the city. The Germans lost more. Adolf Hitler, on the 30th of April 1945, as the sound of advancing Soviet forces reached the Führer bunker, died by suicide there. The war officially ended on the 8th of May, 1945. Berlin was effectively divided in two. The eastern half became the capital of East Germany, a Soviet satellite state. The Brandenburg Gate became the symbol of a divided world. And then the Iron Curtain fell. Exactly as Patton had foreseen. Patton did not live to see it. He lost his life in December 1945. A traffic accident in Germany. The vehicle overturned near Heidelberg. Some said coincidence. Some asked other questions. The question marks remain unanswered. But before dying, he had said one final thing to a journalist. A short, clear, cold sentence. "We fought the wrong enemy." The journalist asked what he meant. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Because that sentence said everything. The Second World War had destroyed Nazi Germany. But in Patton's view, the war had ended by placing a different threat at the heart of Europe. And the ones who would pay the price of this threat were the millions of people who would spend decades learning what freedom meant by watching from behind a wall. When you look at history, the answer is right there. Berlin fell into Soviet hands, and Europe was divided in two for 45 years. In 1961, a wall of concrete and barbed wire was built right through the middle of the city. Families were separated. Brothers couldn't see brothers. Streets were cut in half. People lost their lives trying to cross that wall. The Cold War lasted until 1991, and today we are still debating the shadows of that era. Patton saw this in 1945. He warned. Nobody listened. Historians are still debating. One camp argues that Eisenhower was right. Berlin was by then a symbolic city. The real war had already been won. Moreover, the Soviets had paid an unparalleled price in this war, an estimated 27 million people. Berlin was rightfully theirs. On the other hand, others say Patton saw clearly. The fall of Berlin into Soviet hands laid the groundwork for a catastrophe in Central Europe that would last for generations. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere right in the middle. But this much is certain. Patton saw it. And what would you have done? 50 miles, 48 hours. If you had known all of this in that tent, before that map, under the weight of that order, what would you have chosen? Would you have obeyed? Or would you have tried to change the course of history? Write your answer in the comments. History is shaped not always by the decisions of great men, but sometimes by a single order given by great men. And in the very heart of Germany, on a cold spring morning, a general's silent, solitary, weighty decision made before a map is still shaping our world today. One general's decision. The weight of one order. And the beginning of a world that lasted 45 years. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay tuned.